Everyone in C Block knew the rules. New guards don't last. Especially not young ones. Especially not calm ones. Especially not the quiet types who walk in like they've seen it all before. Officer James Crawford stepped into the block on his first day. No swagger, no shouting, just steady eyes and a clipboard. The inmates watched him like wolves circling prey. And Vincent Viperstone, the prison's most violent enforcer, saw the perfect target. Viper stalked toward him, cracking his neck, grinning wide. "Well, look at this," he boomed. "Fresh meat. Bet you never even seen real violence, pretty boy." Crawford didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't even look up. Viper hated that. He lunged forward and kicked Crawford in the ribs, hard enough to send most rookies to the floor. The force slammed Crawford back against the metal table. The inmates erupted into laughter, pounding on the walls. Viper leaned close. "In here, you earn respect. And you? You ain't earned shit." But then Crawford stood up, slow, controlled, unbothered. And the laughter died. Because there was something in his eyes. A coldness Viper recognized. Not fear, not anger, experience. Before Viper could speak again, the radios crackled to life. "Control to C Block. Officer James Crawford has full clearance. Repeat, full clearance. All inmates, comply with his commands immediately." Viper scoffed, until the warden appeared behind Crawford and said, "Gentlemen, this isn't a rookie." He stepped forward. "This is the man who trained half the tactical units that arrested you." The block went silent. Viper's smirk collapsed. The blood drained from his face. Because for the first time since entering prison, he realized the truth. He hadn't attacked a rookie. He had kicked the one man who'd built a career turning criminals like him into cautionary tales. Stay with me until the end, because what Viper discovers next about Officer Crawford flips the entire prison power structure upside down. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The morning had started like any other at Ironwood State Penitentiary. Guards shuffled through the gates, most of them worn down by years of dealing with the worst society had to offer. Some carried themselves with false bravado, others with genuine fear masked behind stern expressions. But James Crawford walked differently. He moved through the corridors with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. No rushed footsteps, no nervous glances, just purposeful movement towards C Block, the most dangerous section of the entire facility. The other guards noticed. Officer Martinez, a 15-year veteran, watched Crawford from the corner of his eye. "New guys are either crazy, brave, or just plain stupid," he muttered to his partner. "C Block on day one? That's suicide." His partner, Officer Williams, shook his head. "Look at him, though. Something's different. Most rookies are sweating bullets by now. This guy looks like he's going to a staff meeting." They weren't wrong. While other new hires spent their first weeks in minimum security, learning the ropes with petty thieves and drug possession cases, Crawford had specifically requested assignment to the maximum security wing. The warden had raised an eyebrow at the request, but approved it without question. There was something in Crawford's file that made such assignments not just acceptable, but logical. As Crawford approached the heavy steel doors leading into C Block, the familiar sounds grew louder. Shouting, banging on cell doors, the constant undercurrent of tension that permeated every inch of the block. This was where they housed the worst of the worst: murderers, gang leaders, men who had committed crimes so violent that even other criminals gave them wide berth. The electronic locks disengaged with a sharp buzz. The doors swung open, revealing the long corridor lined with cells on both sides. Catcalls and jeers immediately erupted from the inmates who caught sight of the new officer. But Crawford didn't acknowledge them. He simply walked to the central desk, set down his clipboard, and began reviewing the daily roster. Inmate Jackson, serving life for a double homicide, pressed his face against the bars. "Hey, fresh meat. You lost? Minimum security is the other way." Laughter rippled through the block. More inmates joined in, sensing blood in the water. This was their entertainment. their chance to establish dominance over yet another guard who thought he could control them. But Crawford continued his paperwork, methodically checking names and cell assignments. His pen moved steadily across the pages, each motion deliberate and unhurried. The noise around him might as well have been white noise for all the attention he paid it. That's when Vincent Viper Stone emerged from his cell. Viper wasn't just any inmate. At 6'5" and 270 pounds of solid muscle, he commanded respect through fear alone. His arms bore tattoos that told the story of a life lived violently. Teardrops under his left eye marking deaths he'd caused, gang symbols across his chest, and scars that spoke of countless fights both inside and outside prison walls. He had been the undisputed king of C-Block for 4 years running. Guards who crossed him found their shifts becoming nightmares. Inmates who challenged him ended up in the infirmary, if they were lucky. Viper ruled through a combination of brutal efficiency and psychological warfare that kept even the most hardened criminals in line. And now he saw opportunity walking toward him in the form of a quiet officer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Viper's reputation had been built on moments exactly like this. New guards represented fresh challenges, opportunities to demonstrate his power and remind everyone who really controlled C-Block. The younger and more composed they appeared, the more satisfying their eventual breakdown became. As he approached Crawford, Viper cracked his knuckles loudly. The sound echoed through the corridor, causing conversations to die down as inmates positioned themselves to watch the show. This was better than television, better than any entertainment the prison system provided. Well, Viper announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of intimidating people into submission. Look what we got here. A shiny new toy for us to play with. Crawford continued writing on his clipboard, seemingly oblivious to the 270 pounds of menace standing just feet away. His pen moved across the paper in neat, precise strokes, completing whatever administrative task demanded his attention. The lack of reaction only fueled Viper's aggression. In his world, respect was measured by immediate acknowledgement of his presence. Guards typically either cowered or puffed up their chests in false bravado. But this one acted like Vincent Stone didn't even exist. You deaf, boy? Viper stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that somehow carried through the entire block. I'm talking to you. When Viper speaks, you listen. You understand me. Still nothing. Crawford flipped to the next page of his roster, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. A slight furrow appeared between his eyebrows as he located a particular entry, but otherwise his face might as well have been carved from stone. The inmates began to murmur among themselves. This was unprecedented. Nobody ignored Viper. Not guards, not inmates, not even the warden himself when he made his rare appearances in C-Block. The tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Viper's jaw clenched. His hands slowly curled into fists. In his mind, this disrespect couldn't stand. His entire reputation, his control over the block, his very identity within these walls depended on maintaining the fear and respect of everyone around him. And this rookie was threatening all of that with his infuriating calm. Last chance, pretty boy, Viper growled, positioning himself directly in Crawford's line of sight. You acknowledge me right now, or I'm going to teach you some manners the hard way. Crawford finally looked up from his clipboard. His eyes met Viper's with a steady, measuring gaze that betrayed no emotion whatsoever. No fear, no anger, no intimidation, just calm assessment, as if he were looking at a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. That look infuriated Viper more than any words could have. It was the look of someone who saw right through him, who wasn't impressed by his size or his reputation or his carefully cultivated image of violence. It was the look of someone who had seen men like Viper before and found them wanting. And that's when Viper made his move. The kick came fast and brutal, Viper's boot connecting with Crawford's ribs with enough force to crack bone. The impact drove Crawford backward into the metal table with a resounding clang that echoed through C-Block like a gong. The inmates exploded into noise, cheering, laughing, banging on their cell bars in approval. This was what they'd been waiting for. The moment when another arrogant guard learned that authority meant nothing against raw violence. Crawford stumbled, his hand gripping the edge of the table for support. His clipboard clattered to the floor, papers scattering across the concrete. Viper circled like a shark that had tasted blood, his grin spreading wider. "That's right, rookie. Welcome to C-Block. This is how we do things in here." He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "You want respect? You gotta earn it. And you? You ain't earned nothing but that ass-kicking." The laughter grew louder. Inmates who had been lying on their bunks stood up to get a better view. This was the entertainment they craved, watching the system's representatives get humiliated by one of their own. Crawford straightened slowly, one hand pressed to his ribs where the kick had landed. His breathing was controlled, measured, not the gasping panic of someone hurt, but the deliberate rhythm of someone managing pain. Viper leaned in close, his breath hot on Crawford's face. "You gonna cry now, pretty boy? Gonna run to the warden and tell him the mean inmates hurt your feelings?" But Crawford didn't run, didn't cry, didn't even speak. He simply stood there, that same measuring gaze fixed on Viper with an intensity that was starting to feel less like assessment and more like a predator choosing the exact moment to strike. And that's when everything changed. The radio on Crawford's belt crackled to life, cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Control to C-Block. Officer James Crawford has full clearance. Repeat, full clearance. All inmates, comply with his commands immediately." The laughter died as if someone had flipped a switch. Full clearance. That wasn't something they gave to rookies. Full clearance was reserved for specialized personnel, tactical response teams, crisis intervention specialists, officers with authority that superseded normal chain of command. Viper's grin faltered slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time. The heavy steel door at the entrance to C-Block buzzed and swung open. Warden Mitchell strode in, his expression unreadable but his presence commanding immediate silence. Behind him walked three men in tactical gear, not regular correctional officers, but members of the prison's elite response unit. "Gentlemen," the warden said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I see you've met Officer Crawford." He walked slowly down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. Every eye in C-Block followed him, inmates who moments before had been celebrating now pressing themselves nervously against the backs of their cells. The warden stopped beside Crawford, who had finally straightened to his full height, his hand no longer pressed to his ribs. "I should clarify something," the warden continued, looking around at the assembled inmates. "Officer Crawford isn't a rookie." Viper felt his stomach drop. Officer Crawford spent 12 years with the Metropolitan Police Department's Special Operations Division. He holds advanced certifications in tactical planning, criminal psychology, hostage negotiation, and urban warfare tactics. The warden's words landed like hammer blows, each one driving home a reality that Viper was desperately trying to reject. Before joining our staff, Officer Crawford was personally responsible for operations that resulted in over 300 felony arrests and the systematic dismantling of 9 major criminal organizations across 3 states. Inmate Jackson, who had been jeering from his cell moments before, felt his blood run cold. 9 criminal organizations. The Riverside Crew, the East Side Syndicate, the Morrison family. Each one had fallen within the span of 18 months. Taken down by coordinated operations that had seemed impossible in their precision and effectiveness. "Vincent Stone," the warden said, turning his attention directly to Viper. "You were arrested on August 14, 2018, during Operation Nightfall. Does that operation sound familiar to you?" Viper's face went ashen. Operation Nightfall. The raid that had ended his reign of terror on the streets. The night when tactical teams had descended on his organization with such perfect coordination that his entire crew was in custody before they even understood what was happening. 23 arrests. 17 weapons seized. 3 kilos of heroin confiscated. And Viper himself, cornered in a warehouse with nowhere to run, watching his empire crumble in real time. Officer Crawford, the warden continued, was the lead tactical planner for Operation Nightfall. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Crawford, the The quiet rookie that Viper had just kicked had been the architect of his downfall. The man who had spent months studying his organization, identifying weaknesses, predicting movements, and ultimately orchestrating the collapse of everything Viper had built. Crawford finally spoke, his voice carrying easily through the dead silence of C-Block. Vincent Stone. 27 arrests prior to conviction. 6 for assault, 4 for weapons possession, 3 for drug trafficking, 2 for attempted murder. You ran your crew out of the West Side District for 4 years before we brought you down. He bent down and picked up his scattered papers with unhurried precision, as if the kick to his ribs had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Your operation was effective because you understood territory control and maintained discipline through fear. But you made 3 critical mistakes that ultimately led to your arrest. Viper wanted to speak, to deny what he was hearing, but his voice had abandoned him completely. First, Crawford continued, methodically reorganizing his clipboard, you trusted your Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Marcus was feeding us intelligence for 6 months before we moved. Every shipment, every meeting, every plan you made, we knew about it before you even finalized the details. Inmate Rodriguez, who had served under Viper on the outside, pressed his face against his cell bars. Marcus Webb had disappeared 2 weeks before the raid. Everyone assumed he'd been killed by a rival crew. Now they were learning the truth. Marcus had been the reason they all ended up in cages. Second, Crawford said, you followed predictable patterns. Same routes, same meeting locations, same rotation schedules. Made it easy to set up surveillance and predict your movements. He looked up from his clipboard, his eyes finding Viper with that same clinical assessment. And third, you underestimated the people hunting you. You thought cops were stupid, slow, reactive. You never considered that someone might be studying you the same way you studied your territory. Learning your psychology, your decision-making patterns, your weaknesses. The tactical officers behind the warden remained motionless, but their presence was a silent reminder that Crawford's words carried the weight of institutional authority. The night we took you down, Crawford continued, his tone almost conversational, you were planning to meet your supplier at the warehouse on 5th Street. You chose that location because it had multiple exits and clear sight lines. Classic tactical thinking. Viper's hands were trembling now, though whether from rage or fear, even he wasn't sure. What you didn't know was that we'd been inside that warehouse 3 days earlier. We'd mapped every exit, disabled your security cameras, and positioned teams at every possible escape route. When you walked in, you were already surrounded. You just didn't know it yet. Crawford walked over to where Viper stood frozen, stopping just inches away, close enough that only Viper could hear his next words. You spent 4 years thinking you were the apex predator in your territory, but you were just prey that hadn't been hunted yet. The psychological impact of those words was more devastating than any physical blow could have been. Viper's entire self-image, everything he'd built his identity around, crumbled in the face of that simple truth. He hadn't been powerful. He'd been permitted to operate until someone decided it was time to end him. Crawford stepped back and addressed the entire block again. Here's what everyone needs to understand. I didn't request assignment to C-Block because I'm naive or looking to prove something. I requested it because the administration identified this block as requiring specialized intervention. He picked up his tablet from the desk and pulled up a file. Violence in C-Block has increased 43% over the past 14 months. Guards have filed 18 formal complaints about intimidation and threats. 3 inmates have been hospitalized with severe injuries from fights that the current security protocols failed to prevent. The warden stepped forward. The State Correctional Board has authorized implementation of the Enhanced Security Protocol Program. C-Block has been selected as the pilot facility for this program. Inmate Williams, who had been watching everything unfold with growing dread, felt his heart sink. Enhanced Security Protocol. He'd heard whispers about it from inmates transferred from other states, specialized officers with military backgrounds, advanced surveillance systems, predictive behavioral analysis. The kind of program that made traditional prison hierarchies obsolete. Officer Crawford will be overseeing implementation of this program, the warden continued. He has full authority to modify cell assignments, implement new security measures, and recommend disciplinary actions based on behavioral assessment. Crawford set down his tablet and looked around C Block with the clinical precision of someone conducting an inventory. I've already reviewed every file in this block. Every arrest record, every incident report, every psychological evaluation, every disciplinary action. I know your histories, your patterns, your relationships with other inmates. He pulled up a specific file on his tablet. Jackson, you're currently planning to test my authority sometime in the next 72 hours. You'll wait for me to establish a routine, then orchestrate some kind of incident designed to gauge my response patterns. Textbook predator behavior. Jackson's face went white. The accuracy of that prediction was terrifying. Rodriguez, you're taking a different approach. You're calculating how to position yourself as an informant, thinking you can trade information about other inmates for preferential treatment. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. That exact strategy had been forming in his mind since the moment Crawford walked through the door. Williams, you're planning to stay completely invisible for the next 2 weeks while you observe how I handle situations. Classic surveillance and assessment pattern. Williams pressed himself against the back wall of his cell, suddenly feeling exposed despite the concrete barriers. And you, Viper, Crawford said, turning his attention back to the man who had kicked him. You're not planning anything right now. Your entire worldview has just been shattered, and you're experiencing something you haven't felt since you were 14 years old. Genuine fear of consequences you can't control or predict. The accuracy of these predictions sent ripples of unease through every inmate in C Block. This wasn't guesswork or lucky assumptions. This was systematic analysis by someone who understood criminal psychology better than they understood themselves. Crawford walked back to the central desk and picked up the manila folder he'd brought with him. These are new cell assignments based on psychological compatibility assessments and risk factor analyses. Some of you will be moved to different blocks entirely. Others will remain here under modified conditions. He opened the folder and began reading names. Jackson, you're being transferred to D Block effective tomorrow morning. Your behavioral profile indicates you function better in environments with more structured oversight. Rodriguez, you'll remain in C Block but your cell assignment is being changed. You'll be moved to Cell 7, adjacent to inmates who have demonstrated positive behavioral patterns. Williams, you're staying in your current location, but you'll be enrolled in the education program starting next week. Your psychological profile suggests intellectual stimulation reduces your tendency toward manipulation. Each assignment was delivered with the same clinical precision. Not punishment, not reward, just systematic placement based on data and analysis. When Crawford reached Viper's name, the entire block held its breath. Vincent Stone. You're remaining in C Block, Cell 12. But your privileges are being modified pending behavioral assessment. No commissary access for 30 days. No phone calls for 2 weeks. Recreation time reduced to 1 hour daily, supervised. Viper wanted to protest, to rage against the injustice, but the fight had drained out of him completely. The man standing in front of him had dismantled his street empire and was now dismantling his prison identity with the same methodical efficiency. Additionally, Crawford continued, you'll be meeting with the prison psychologist twice weekly for cognitive behavioral therapy sessions. Your violence patterns indicate underlying trauma responses that have never been properly addressed. The suggestion that Viper needed therapy, that his violence came from pain rather than strength, was perhaps the most devastating blow of all. Crawford closed the folder and looked around C Block one final time. Here's what's going to happen over the next few weeks. Each of you will be given opportunities to demonstrate your current behavioral patterns. Some of you will adapt to the new environment. Others will resist and discover that resistance has consequences you haven't anticipated. He picked up his radio. Control, this is Crawford. Initial assessment of C Block complete. Ready to implement Phase 1 protocols. The response crackled back immediately. Copy that, Officer Crawford. Phase 1 protocols are authorized. Crawford turned to the warden. Sir, I recommend we begin cell reassignments tonight rather than waiting until morning. Early implementation will prevent inmates from coordinating resistance strategies. The warden nodded. Agreed. I'll have the transfer team ready within the hour. As the warden and tactical officers filed out, Crawford remained at his desk, resuming his paperwork as if nothing significant had just occurred. But everyone in C Block understood that everything had changed. The old rules, violence equals respect, fear equals control, survival means never showing weakness, had been replaced by something far more unsettling. A system that understood them better than they understood themselves. That night, as cell reassignments began, the reality of the enhanced security protocol became clear. Inmates who had been neighbors for years were separated based on psychological compatibility assessments. Gang members were dispersed to prevent organizational coordination. Violent offenders were placed in cells with clear sightlines from guard stations. And through it all, Crawford moved with the calm efficiency of someone executing a plan that had been months in the making. Viper watched from his cell as his former associates were systematically scattered throughout the facility. The power structure he'd built over 4 years was being dismantled in a single night. Jackson, being escorted to D Block, caught Crawford's eye as he passed. "This ain't over," he muttered, trying to salvage some dignity. Crawford looked up from his tablet. "Yes, it is. You just don't realize it yet." The simple certainty of that statement was more intimidating than any threat could have been. By midnight, C Block had been completely reorganized. New neighbors who had been selected for their incompatibility with violence. New schedules designed to prevent the formation of coordinated groups. New rules that prioritized predictability over punishment. Crawford stood at the central desk, reviewing the final reports. Around him, C Block had fallen into an uneasy quiet, not the tense silence of imminent violence, but the uncertain stillness of men trying to understand a game whose rules had fundamentally changed. The radio on his belt crackled. "Officer Crawford, this is the warden. How's the first night going?" Crawford looked around the block one final time before responding. "Phase 1 implementation complete, sir. Resistance levels within predicted parameters. I anticipate full compliance within 72 hours. And Vincent Stone?" Crawford glanced at Viper's cell, where the once feared enforcer sat on his bunk, staring at the wall with hollow eyes. "Stone is processing the paradigm shift. He'll require additional attention, but the psychological assessment suggests he's capable of positive behavioral change with proper intervention." "Good work, Crawford. The board is watching this pilot program closely. If C Block shows measurable improvement, we'll be rolling out enhanced security protocols system-wide." As Crawford signed off, he noticed Viper watching him from the cell. Their eyes met, predator and prey, except now the roles were permanently reversed. Crawford held that gaze for a long moment, then returned to his paperwork. Because that's what this was really about. Not punishment, not revenge, not even justice in the traditional sense. It was about systematic change. Taking men who had spent their lives operating on instinct and violence, and forcing them to confront the possibility that they could be something different. Some would embrace it. Others would fight it. But everyone would face it. The State Correctional Board's report on C Block was released 3 months after Crawford's first day. Violence down 68%. Guard complaints down 82%. Inmate participation in education and rehabilitation programs up 143%. The enhanced security protocol was approved for system-wide implementation. Vincent Viper Stone completed his first cognitive behavioral therapy program and began mentoring younger inmates, teaching them the lessons he'd learned about violence and consequences. Jackson, transferred to D Block, enrolled in vocational training and discovered he had an aptitude for electrical work. Rodriguez stopped trying to manipulate the system and started using his intelligence for something other than exploitation. And Officer James Crawford continued his work, moving from facility to facility, implementing the same systematic changes that had transformed C Block. Because in the end, the most powerful weapon against violence wasn't more violence. It was understanding, prediction, and the absolute certainty that someone was always 3 steps ahead. The kick that Viper had delivered on Crawford's first day had been meant to establish dominance. Instead, It had marked the beginning of the end for everything Viper thought he knew about power. And in the months and years that followed, inmates across the state system would learn the same lesson that C-Block had learned that day. When you kick the man who trained the hunters, you don't become powerful. You just become prey. If this story opened your eyes to a different side of justice, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. What do you think about Crawford's methods? Is this the future of corrections, or does it go too far? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to smash that like button to help us share these powerful stories with more people. Thanks for watching Behind Bar Tales, where we tell the stories that remind us there's always more than meets the eye.